we already have laws in place regarding calls to violence. Most Western societies do. I mean, if we want to take the you can't shout fire in a crowded theater kind of thing, like calls to violence or calls to panic or whatever it is, are classified under a special, I suppose, subheading of free speech. So in this case, however, I think what perhaps people would say is that, well, they're not actually calling for violence. They are lamenting the lack of a violent actions.
Trump has been painted as the next Hitler, basically. Like somehow he's going to end democracy if he's getting elected. It's going to be a dictatorship. Like he had his chance for 4 years to end democracy, but he didn't take it. You don't have to like him, but either he's incompetent at ending democracy because he couldn't do it in 4 years and he needs another 4 years. So people are going to vote him in so he can end democracy from now on, like for good now. If people truly believe what has been said about him, they feel like it's somewhat morally justified. Like if it's preventing a greater evil, if it's framed to be a similar, if the threat level is just as high. And I think if you measure it based on that and not by actions, people can believe that quite easily. And welcome back to the Critical Compass. I'm James and this is Mike. And today we're going to talk about the attempted assassination on Donald Trump and the results of that, both from the media and also the right-wing cancel culture that we've seen pop up in response to some of the events that have unfolded. Mike, you've got a few notes already lined up and that you want to share. How about you start us off?
Yeah, well, I wanted to kind of do this episode on what we're seeing, sort of an interesting development of this, what I guess is being called right-wing cancel culture, because cancel culture is something we normally associate with leftist politics, at least in the last half dozen years, but it's sort of been absent from the right because the right has somewhat been unified in its response of the right and libertarians and just generally people who are present themselves as being against cancel culture and against kind of woke ideology that generates that. But what we're seeing now in the wake of the attempted assassination is a really interesting divide, and it's brought up some some emotions that have been kind of sitting pretty heavy in a lot of people. I've got a few tweets just kind of lined up. I don't know all these people. I know a couple of them, but it's an interesting. There's sort of a loud, maybe it's a loud minority saying, "Hey, you know what? This has been something that the left has been doing to us for years. Anytime we step out of whatever they've determined, the Overton window is for any given topic." They've been slamming us with, getting us fired from jobs and, getting our social media accounts pulled and stuff. So I don't feel any remorse for the people who are getting fired for saying that they wish the shooter didn't miss. And then there's a couple we were talking about this off the recording, and I would say that like my inherent kind of response to that is agreement. I kind of, a primal part of me sort of agrees with that, like, that it's the just desserts. But then there's a couple writers and Dave Smith will end on a clip from his Part of the Problem podcast that kind of I feel are probably a little bit more measured and a little bit more of a mature response. But anyway, let's pull the first one up here. I will pull this live here. So this is Am Leah on X. Quote, OMG, y'all went after a grandma and got her fired from Home Depot. Y'all made us watch our grandmas die scared, alone, and in the hospital, so get effed.
It's very resentful / you deserve this kind of attitude.
Yeah, like it's sort of Yeah, you can see here that there's an implication that, you know, one is more of a serious, one is like actually a cancellation, and the other was not justified. She followed, this was from 11 a.m. a few days ago. Then she followed it up with this one. If you've ever watched a rabid liberal salivating over the thought of kicking your family out of the grocery store while you try to buy milk maskless, not exactly sure how you have one single F left in your field of Fs upon the spinning rock we call Earth to have sympathy for them because they think assassination is how to deal with differing opinions. So beyond the fact that I love how that sentence is crafted, it's I don't know. What do you think of her point here?
It is tricky because anything that calls for, like, we do make exceptions with free speech with like calls to violence or calling for somebody's head. It gets tricky when it's like, is that the way to actually deal with these? Is pushing for somebody to get fired is like the mob mentality? Is that the healthy way to approach that? Or is that just us playing by the same rules as the leftist kind of cancel culture played for however many years? So what principles are we going to fall back onto, and how much of this mob mentality is healthy?
Yeah. And that's a good point you raise with, we already have laws in place regarding calls to violence. Most Western societies do. I mean, if we want to take, I suppose we can probably take American, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights of the U.S. here, because this is centered on, around U.S. commentators, and it was a U.S. event. They specifically have, that I don't know what the term for it is, but like you can't shout fire in a crowded theater kind of thing, like calls to violence or calls to panic or whatever it is, are classified under a special, I suppose, subheading of free speech. So in this case, however, I think what perhaps people would say is that, well, they're not actually calling for violence. They are lamenting the lack of a violent action. So is this the same thing, or is there any difference there in your estimation?
It's a little bit different, but it's very tasteless. It's not ideal. You do sometimes find this on, even I've seen some notable like Canadian commenters or people mentioning, well, if certain Canadian politicians broke these laws and those laws are treason, that should result in whatever corporal punishment and in a noose. So I've seen these things be mentioned where if you take it at face value, like, oh, is that calling for direct action, or is that saying, is there more nuance behind that? And people don't really operate in nuance when there's only a certain number of characters when you can blast out up to the internet. So my issue with anything like that is like, the worst interpretation is always going to be taken if you're pushing that line. So that gets difficult to find where that line is. I personally wouldn't say that, but I don't think it's like it doesn't fit that line of criminality. Mm-hmm. But I don't think the mob should call for somebody to be fired over those comments. But there's nothing stopping an employer being like, well, this makes you a disgusting human and we don't want to associate. But how much of that is just the employer and how much of that is the mob? That's where I would maybe make a distinction of like the mob mentality of advocating for somebody's livelihood to be removed from, like, that's different than somebody being affected by their own actions under their employer, just observing what they said. So
yeah, we saw a lot of this. Yeah, I tend to agree. I think we saw a lot of this during COVID, where we had people being let go from their jobs for espousing certain viewpoints about, vaccines or whatever the case may be, all the associated contentious issues that came up around that, vaccine passports, things like that. And maybe, we're almost 10 minutes into this and we should probably reference, all this is referring to, I believe, one particular elderly woman who worked at a Home Depot in the U.S. who posted, something of a very similar sentiment to what lots of people were saying about how, they wish that the shooter didn't miss. We'll get into a little bit more detail about that later with Lauren Southern's tweet, but yeah, I was gonna say there's kind of a distinction to be made, I think, between like what you say about if an employer wants to distance themselves from somebody based on the things that they said, and whether or not they're doing that out of the values that company claims to promote, or if they're doing it just to avoid public backlash against the company name. So is there any sort of, do you distinguish there at all? Do you think that there's any sort of
I don't know if there's enough pressure from the company without the mob mentality, because ultimately the only reason the company's caring is because there's enough of an online backlash and people are like, let it be sending emails, or like there's that activism component, which is exactly what the left did on all these issues. So in the case where it's not criminal, I think you should be able to call it out and be like, this is not cool. Like, this is hypocritical look compared to what people have been fired for, or what has been said on the right, which has had consequences that the left mobbed over and pursued employers to damage. So I think if left to their own devices, a company would only do that if it like really affected their image and they don't want to be associated. So if the right doesn't mob together and call for that, I don't think some of these people will be fired. It also depends on the position, because Home Depot employee, that's somebody who said, like, that's a little bit different than the case you had in BC here in Canada. Like, was it a professor who was basically said the same thing, that was upset that, well, the bullet didn't miss. And in that case, a public profile and now we're getting in the case of like, well, how much should a practitioner or is somebody's social media an extension of their professional identity, and or as a professor, is that, how interwoven is that to their identity with that particular school or their tenureship? Or so in that case, I can see that not reflecting the values of a university. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I don't think I disagree with that either. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, if we took this exact situation and we just subtracted like 50 years, 40 years even, you would have there would be a situation where there was probably a very similar level of discourse happening around any sort of event like this, that an employer or an institution would never have, like, they would never know. They would never have any cause to know that, what people talk about in their own homes. But because we of the age we live in, you put this stuff online and, there becomes a viral kind of movement around it. And before you know it, it's a very, even though, yes, you're posting it publicly, but most of these people, especially elderly people, you could probably assume, believe that what their public posts are mostly just circulated around their friends or followers, that their small group of people that they have online. And then before you know it, it becomes an international scandal. The technology didn't exist for such things, until very recently.
The amplifications there. So it's like you think you're just sending a message to a small group, but if something goes viral, it gets amplified outside of your circle, and now it has unlimited reach in a way. So it can get very loud very quickly for somebody who does not think that at all be seen by that many people, which maybe they would have worded it differently if they knew that it was going to be passed around. So the rhetoric, I'm not surprised though, because if you look at everything that's been said up to this point through the media and through the institutions, and even with the convictions and the court cases going on, Trump has been painted as the next Hitler, basically. That somehow he's going to end democracy if he's getting elected. It's going to be a dictatorship. Like, he had his chance for 4 years to end democracy, but he didn't take it. You don't have to like him, but either he's incompetent at ending democracy because he couldn't do it in 4 years, and he needs another 4 years. So people are going to vote him in so he can end democracy from now on, like, for good now. But if people truly believe what has been said about him, I think people things like, well, if you have a chance to like time machine, you go back in time, like, would you put a pillow over the little baby Hitler's crib,
little baby Adolf?
Yeah. It's that same kind of scenario. They feel like it's somewhat morally justified. Like, if it's preventing a greater evil, if it's framed to be a similar degree of, if the threat level is just as high. And I think the threat level is only measured through your perceived number of mentions and like how vitriolic the messaging is behind it. So if you measure it based on that and not by actions, people can believe that quite easily.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, Dave Smith, who we'll hear from a little bit here, had a tweet right away after it happened, where the attempt happens, and then you hear uniform messaging from the media of like, this is not how we do things in America. We're a peaceful nation. We can't be resorting to violence, et cetera, right? And he's like, well, how are you going to, like, exactly like you said, how are you going to be the media government apparatus that for the last 8 years has been shouting from the rooftops about how, Trump is a threat to democracy. He's in collusion with Russia. He's going to, turn the country into a dictatorship. He's in some cases, as in the case of that, wasn't it there a Time magazine cover that had him like photoshopped next to Hitler and like talking about, like, you cannot do that and at the same time act shocked and righteously indignant when someone goes, you get into somebody's head and they go, oh, well, I'm going to be that hero that's going to, stop the evil orange man, right? Yeah,
and it's one thing for that attempted assassination, regardless of everything that underpins that. It's the people's response to it being, oh, I wish the wind was a little bit different so the shot would have landed. Like, people, and you could see the people saying this are likely just the average person, likely kind individuals in normal respects, but like in this one case, that feels morally justified because of the rhetoric, which is a strange thing to like, well, it shows that the rhetoric is powerful if the messages are said over and over and over again. And I do remember a time, maybe like it was within the first year of Donald getting elected, I remember how much I didn't like him. And then a couple of things came out. I'm like, well, he didn't actually say that. And they're hammering home on like the very fine people or some of these other common tropes where the media took him to task on something he didn't actually say. And if you play the full clip, he gave context and he gave a very clear distinction. The media's like, well, why didn't he denounce the Nazis? And like, well, he literally did right after the clip you showed, if you play more than 20 seconds. So
yeah, well, that happened recently too, if you remember. Do you remember with when he was talking about how he would bring back auto manufacturing to the US instead of giving so much of it away to the Mexicans? because a lot of maybe people don't know, a lot of North American vehicle manufacturing happens in Mexico, and it's been increasing over recent years. And the term that he used was, he said it'll be a bloodbath if we don't do this. And what the media, this even on, I was really disappointed to see this, because even on Joe Rogan, when Jonathan Haidt was on, and they played this clip, and they played the edited version of the clip where he sort of cut out a little bit more lead up to before he says the word bloodbath. They even played the proper clip afterwards, and even then Jonathan Haidt did not accept that this was, he thought that it was, oh yeah, this is very dangerous rhetoric, but that's only dangerous rhetoric if you don't understand economics and you don't know the proper economic usage of the word bloodbath, which refers to I don't know the exact definition, but it refers to a large disparity of an economic loss and gain. The American economy would suffer a bloodbath in comparison to what the gains that the Mexican economy is having because of the infrastructure that it has.
That was part of the definition as well. I don't know if I have the paper trail, but I believe Webster's, they updated their definition shortly after to hide or diminish the other.
Oh, the other definition.
Yeah. Yeah. The other definition.
Here it is.
Yeah.
A period of disastrous loss or reversal. And the example they use, a few mutual funds performed well in the general bloodbath of the stock market. So a completely reasonable term to use in the context.
So there's also compilations of CNN and all the other media using that term, and other politicians using that term. So it's well, again, this is the crux of the issue. It's if the underlying principle is we demand the same type of speech to be treated the same way, doesn't matter who's saying it, and we want unbiased reporting and we want unbiased rules on either side. That's the underlying principle. So if somebody on CNN can say bloodbath, or some Democratic senator can say bloodbath, and it doesn't have the same consequence, then it should just be a level playing field that way. And the same thing of if we decide what is proper, what is criminal speech and what is not, we should be applying rules equally across the board. So what these examples show is that we do not have a unbiased media apparatus that just tells events, just showcases events and lets people decide for themselves the meaning behind it. It is a narrative driven, it's a conclusion first apparatus. And we have example over example. And somebody doesn't have to like Trump at all. There's plenty of things that I think he could do better, articulate better. And there's certainly better potential leaders, but I do feel like the media attacks on him are completely unfair. And it's very clear. And as long as they continue to be unfair, Trump's base will just double down. And that's the thing. It's bolstering him because it's proving him right, and is actually giving him more credibility than he would have got otherwise to the people that see the attacks happen in real time.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it years ago, but they were like, this tactic would be way more effective if they ever reported on any of his successes during his presidency, of which he had a number. If they ever reported on any tiny success, then the criticisms would ring much truer, and it would look much less forced and much less propagandistic, right? But they don't get it. They can't do it. They can't intellectually, emotionally, morally bring themselves to do it, and their credibility suffers for it.
Well, and the one last little point on this, the fact that he's speaking up and standing up against these constant attacks is, I think, the reason why a lot of people will vote for him. Where a leftist, their perception is that, well, the people on the right, well, look at how many racists there are who just don't like immigrants or who just don't like this. And they think it's a bunch of racists or hateful people found somebody just as racist and hateful as them. Therefore, that's why they're voting. They're not seeing this other side to it because these leftists have complete trust in the media. Therefore, it doesn't even pop into their head that people would have a major issue and vote for somebody or support somebody who's standing up against the unbiased coverage.
Yeah, it's a very simplistic way of analyzing politics, but that's a plague on both sides. Okay, I'm gonna bring up our another tweet here from our future friend of the channel as well. I love Josie, the redheaded libertarian, often seen on Timcast. She says, the same people outraged over those getting fired from their jobs for celebrating the death of a firefighter and lamenting a failed assassination wanted you fired from your job for being unvaccinated 3 years ago, and also wanted your children taken away, so I'm fresh out of F's. I'm not making an effort to get anyone fired, but I'm also not going to cry about it if a business no longer wants to associate with an employee who publicly and brazenly and without empathy wishes death on another human being. And I think that kind of... the way I structured these tweets is not by accident. I think this is a moderation of the previous poster's tweets, where I'm more empathetic to this for somebody who has a somebody who may have had to potentially suffer the fear of having their kids taken from them for not vaccinating them or not being vaccinated themselves. Like I get the impulse to feel I can't think of the word, but like vengeful, to somebody and not feel any remorse for the same thing happening.
And it's natural to feel a little bit of that vengeance or a little bit of that, like, last 4 years, like COVID wasn't that long ago. So like we're in the thick of it, not like just a couple of years ago. So some of these feelings are still very raw. And when this comes up, it's I think people aren't in the emotional space to have full sympathy and full empathy, but she also balances it out a little bit of like, she's not actively participating in the mob.
Yeah.
But she's not going
to lose any sleep over it. Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of get that. Okay, we'll switch it over to, this is the big one. So this is Lauren Southern. I think she's an independent journalist now. She used to work for Rebel News back in the day. This is a big one, but I'm going to read it because it's good. Okay, if conservatives spent 1/10 of the time they're spending doxing random minimum wage workers on actually reading policy, door knocking, or holding actual people in power accountable, we'd be living in a very different world. Instead, we get this deranged, well, they did it to me, so it's revenge time nonsense, which quite frankly is only politically useful for like 10 seconds until the tables turn and the exact same revenge fantasies are played out against you. Also, is entirely useless when when it's just a bunch of working class dolts doing it to each other while their country gets raped by politicians who love that they're not paying attention. I also hate that there's this assumption she's not struggling because she's elderly and working there. The average cashier position at Home Depot is what, like $14 to $16 an hour. We don't know her life, or who she's caring for, what her debts are, etc. She says she's not an educator, she's not a lawmaker, she's not a doctor, she's just a random Facebook commentator. This section, she says she kind of, compares her to her grandmother, who was very anti-Bush and would have said, potentially similar things, and how that would, how she would, definitely freak out if that happened to her grandmother, who otherwise was a very, loving woman. She says, I could even see a teenage version of me thinking it was funny to post something like that about Obama, although I doubt libs of TikTok would go after my university applications, job, or anything like that because I would have been politically on side. Once again, unless you're in a position of any sort of authority in society, blowing off steam by saying stupid shit online should be none of our concern. That should be a yelling match you have with your family and Thanksgiving dinner, the way my family would argue about Bush when I was growing up. The second they're an educator or a lawmaker, for sure that's a different story, and a hell of a lot more useful to focus on these people. I'm sick of this weird IRL doxing of randos, though. It's sick in the head and useless. Thoughts?
That's a very well articulated and makes the distinctions, especially of like, is working class people our target? And especially, well, how well informed is this grandmother working at Home Depot as well? and it's not like she's somebody teaching a bunch of kids or in a position of great responsibility and power. So
yeah,
I think that's a completely different scenario than like the professor representing UBC.
yeah, that's a case where somebody, a prospective student might want to know that because they would have a pretty good idea if they're, it used to be the case when I was in school, it used to be the case that the professor would just sort of have to like suck it up and, mark your papers on their merit rather than, and I did definitely have some professors that did that better than others, but it doesn't feel like that's really the case anymore. I mean, it's been, a decade plus since I've been out of university. So that's, it just feels now that like maybe it's sort of an unspoken thing that like, if you're taking a class from a progressive professor, you better be writing progressive papers, right?
Yeah. One other thought on Lauren Sutherland is she's been put through the ringer and canceled more times than pretty much anybody else. And she was even denied entry into Australia. So for her, the process of being attacked and canceled like that is I don't think she doesn't take that lightly. And
I guess she does have the firsthand experience.
Yeah. That's the thing. How many of the people advocating or going out and reaching out to Home Depot to try to get this grandmother fired, how many of them have fully had the docs? So in one way, if somebody was fired for a job for something else, then they're doing the revenge. But even for Lauren, she's like, well, like revenge it's short-lived. It's not helpful. Like it's not going to get us to a higher trust society or a place where we can sort out differences between us. So ideally, you would highlight this shitty thing, and then we'd have a conversation around why that's not a ideal thing to say. Like that can still happen without like running to the employer and trying to affect somebody's livelihood.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay, I'm going to, this might be a short one, I think, today. I don't think we need to go for a full hour. This is about a 4-minute clip or so from the Dave Smith Part of the Problem podcast. And I'm going to full screen it if I can. So this is his kind of thoughts on the matter, and I thought it was a good kind of succinct way of putting it. And we'll just listen to a few minutes here.
Like, look, what just happened was an assassination attempt against the guy who has been in the crosshairs of the most powerful secretive organizations in the world. They've been attempting to take him out in many different ways. We don't know all the details about what just happened here, but it's pretty clear already that the official story is bullshit. And it is, let's just say where we're at right now is at least it is shocking that this was allowed to happen. And there's a lot of different signs that like this was kind of allowed to happen. Everything in life is a finite resource. You only have so much breath in your lungs. You only have so many hours in a day. You only have so much energy that you can put into anything. And if you're putting that energy rather than adding pressure to get some type of explanation, to get to the truth, which we have a much better shot of getting at than, say, in the JFK assassination or something like that. We got lots of different camera angles and lots of different brilliant people online who can start piecing things together. But instead, you're using that energy to go after a wage worker to get their life ruined because they said something that offended you. I just hate that stuff. I think it's gross and horrible. It feeds into the worst instincts in people to start celebrating ruining somebody's life over what? Who even knows what the situation is with this person? Somebody a little bit unbalanced who said a crazy thing, who works at Home Depot. You want to get them ruined, and you don't think that's like bad for you? You don't think that's bad for your soul to be doing that to other people? And you can You can sit here and rationalize all day about how the left would do this to you, and so therefore it's okay to go do this to other people. Bullshit. You're rationalizing away this nonsense, and you're not doing it to the left. You're doing it to some lady who worked at Home Depot. It's just, I hate it. It's stupid. It's you becoming everything that you claimed you hated and you claimed you were like rising up against. I just think it's terrible. And it's I don't care. Like, I don't support anybody losing their social media over anything. I don't care what it was. I don't care how fucked up the comment was, even if it's something like celebrating after somebody dies or something like that. You're either on the side of free speech or you're not. And I'm gonna myself be on that side. So I don't care. I'm not for tech censorship when it was right-wingers who I disagreed with. I'm not for tech censorship when it's left-wingers who I disagree with. And I'm not for getting people fired from hourly wage jobs for having a fucked up political take. Screw all that, man. Just awful.
So yeah, I think that sums it up pretty eloquently, pretty succinctly. What's your take on that?
Well, if cancel culture is bad, if it's wrong, and right-wingers have felt it, then it's wrong no matter where it happens and who it happens to. So if we're changing the culture, then we shouldn't be participating in the thing we want to change. If you don't want to happen to you, I agree. Like, it's that simple.
I agree, and I'm going to put on, maybe this will be the contentious little last topic we end this on. Could take a while, I don't know. I'm going to put my Christopher Rufo hat on and say, now remember, I agree with you, I agree with Dave Smith here, I think cancel culture is wrong regardless. However, if you're and we aren't this, but if you're a right-wing think tank or organization or politician, and you see the left having done this and gotten away with it for years and having pretty stunningly successful results in establishing control over many political, social, corporate institutions, do you not sit back and say, well, you know what, if this is the game and this is how you win, then even though it goes against our principles, this is what we have to do. The fact that we could win and reestablish control of these institutions that we lost and start to run them better and more in line with our principles, do the ends justify the means, basically? Thoughts?
Well, you can,
and I love Christopher Rufo, but yeah, I'm just, that's how he would approach it, I think,
kind
right?
of justify it, but depending on how you word it, it sounds more logical than others. Like, well, to create a society without cancel culture, we must first cancel those who are propagating the cancel culture so we can establish a cancel-free culture under our own terms. So it's like, if you word it like that, then it's not as savory. But in the same way, I've seen a few commenters mention that since it's institutional control is in the left's hands right now, until the institutions are revised and or reestablished with more of a mix of more than a single ideology and more than a single, like, there's more representation of people on all stripes of political leanings. Until that happens and they have the means to play dirty, they're saying that you will keep on losing. The amount of power that they wield is disproportionate, and they will maintain that power unless you fight with whatever extra power you have to be able to fight with. So I can understand that the perspective,
balance, right?
Yeah. But
yeah, I think there's merit to it, but it's sort of like what Smith said, where he's like, this isn't good for your soul. Like maybe it's effective, but as a long-term strategy, I don't think it is. And this is where you shift. I think where, ethically you have to shift from a, utilitarian mindset to more of a deontological one, where you say, listen, like, just like you said, do you want to establish a society where, we're a high trust society? We believe in our institutions. We believe that people act, people in positions of power act generally in good faith. Well, then it's pretty hard to go back from, okay, but how did you get here? That old, there's a saying in the dating scene, James, where they say, and this applies to he or her, but in our case, if she'll cheat with you, she'll cheat on you. And so maybe that's a similar thing here. How do you, if you have a bunch of politicians or a bunch of, political influencers who have gotten there through unsavory means, can you ever really trust that, if they won and they got into the positions of power that they wanted, can you trust that now we are working in, we are being forthright and we are working in everyone's best interest now. We're not lying anymore. We're not canceling anymore.
Yeah, where does the checks and balance exist in this scenario of like, this is where if you go to first principles of like, well, cancel culture is fundamentally a corrosive force that dissolves trust and erodes away at free speech and erodes away at our democracy. If that's the underlying principle, then that would be the balance. But if you say we must use whatever we can to win, so we can establish that in, if you're already playing with those tools and you truly believe that you are correct and your ideas are the correct ones and they must be implemented, then why would you stop using the tools? Where is the self-correction going to happen in this case?
Yeah.
So this is where like the checks and balances have to be woven in at a principle level, or it just gets thrown out along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, like a true winner, like a real winner isn't afraid of a fair fight, basically.
Yeah, and truth should rise to the top no matter what. Like if you have to force a truth, then it's not the truth. Like it should be able to shine through, and you should be able to like point at it, and it should be able to defend itself along the way. So I'm skeptical of anything that anytime if somebody plays dirty for the right reason, ultimately that's going to undermine, maybe not now, maybe it's a little bit later. It's going to undermine either somebody's values or somebody's perception of your values if you're playing that game. So ultimately it's not ideal.
I think that's a nice, tidy little thought to end on. What about you?
I think we've covered that pretty well. I'm curious how that unfolds as well.
Yeah.
If we'll see more of this, because right now the temperatures are high enough that I imagine that this one lady at Home Depot is not the only person who will say something similar.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if it's if this is a tipping point or if it's how quickly people forget things online these days. So we'll see. But yeah, this is a great one. Yeah, thanks a lot for your insights and for going along with me through this.
Yeah, thanks for finding those links.
Yeah, right on. Okay, well, I've just taken over the hosting duty from you from this episode, so I guess I will say Mike, thanks for your time.
We are co-hosts. They
yeah, right.
It ebbs and flows. So,
well, thanks again, and thanks for everyone for listening. Appreciate your time and attention, and follow us on. We now have a presence on Spotify. We are slowly uploading our episodes from YouTube onto Spotify. So I think we are on Apple Podcasts too. I tried to link it the other day, and I think it worked. But we'll see. It takes a little bit of time to upload on the back end, but yeah, we'll be on the streaming platforms, YouTube, Rumble, everything else.
Yeah,
so.
Rumble for any time we talk about medical misinformation will be on Rumble for those for those episodes.
Anytime we fail to recall our re-education.
Yep.
All right. Thanks,
All
James.
right.
Appreciate
Well,
it as
that was a
always,
good
sir. Thank you.
Take care. We'll see you in the next one.